When a 12-year-old girl was told by a psychic how she would die, she laughed it off. 15 years later, that prediction started coming true, but by then, it was already too late. Before we start the story, please hit the like button. It helps YouTube share it with more people, which lets me make even more stories. Thank you for your help. Let's get into the story. I grew up in a tiny town in Vermont. Tiny in terms of population, not size. There were huge sprawling farms and wooded areas, but almost no people. More cows than people, which is standard for a lot of small towns in Vermont. So, clearly, not the most fun in the world for a kid who was sick of freezing winters and awful, balmy summers surrounded by boring Vermonters that didn't have many kids my age. My only close friend was Tina, who was a year older than me. We spent almost all our time with each other, constantly dreaming about life outside of Vermont. The people in our town were strange folk, different than in other places. One thing I didn't realize about small towns until I moved to the city is how incredibly superstitious people in towns like mine could be. They believed in the strange, the paranormal. They believed in Luvia. Luvia was an older French-Canadian woman who had moved to Vermont when she met her husband, and everyone in town thought she was a clairvoyant, psychic. Even my own parents did. One day, my mother lost her wedding ring. She had looked around everywhere for it. They called Luvia, and she immediately told them it was under old, rotting wood. They looked in the backyard, where my father had been tearing apart a decaying piano he'd found. My mother had helped him one day. The ring was there, under old, rotting wood. After hearing a lot about Luvia from older townsfolk who seemed to think she was 100% credible, Tina and I decided to go see her one evening. Have you ever met a psychic who predicted something that came true? Tell me your creepiest psychic experience in the comments. I'll read every single one, to try to find out whatever she could tell us about the future. I was skeptical, but it seemed like a fun thing to do as a joke. So we dropped by her house in the early evening, and she opened the door as we walked up the pathway to her house, before we even had a chance to knock. Tina elbowed me hard in the ribs and whispered that Luvia was clearly a psychic. She sensed us coming to the door. I whispered back that it probably had more to do with her house being full of windows, and the fact that she probably saw us coming from a long way away. Either way, I started to feel strange the minute we got close to her. She was very old, very tiny, and kind of sunken. Sunken eye sockets and sharp cheekbones and a sort of concave chest cavity. It was more than a little unnerving, but she smiled and was sweet to us, and I started to warm up to her. Nothing about her or her house screamed creepy psychic to me, just a well-dressed older woman in a cabin-style house. It looked like you'd imagine any typical grandmother's home: doilies, knitting, family magazines, etc. We told her that we were interested in a clairvoyant reading, and handed her about $20 that we had scrounged together between the two of us. She led us to her kitchen table and asked which of us wanted to go first. "What can you tell me about my love life?" Tina asked. Luvia had no crystal ball, tarot cards, or tea leaves. She just closed her eyes and sat silently for about 2 minutes. Then, she took a deep breath and said, "Michael Carton." Tina stared at her for a few seconds, until Luvia repeated, "Michael Carton, the man you're going to marry. Michael Carton." Tina thanked her and repeated the name to herself a few times. "Michael Carton, Michael Carton, Michael Carton." Luvia then turned to me. "Whatever you can tell me, I'd like to hear," I said. "It doesn't have to be about my love life or anything." Luvia closed her eyes for a few seconds, but information about me seemed to reach her much quicker than her visions of Tina's husband. She looked straight into my eyes, grabbed my hands and said, "The thing that will kill you is shedding its skin. The thing that will kill you is sharpening its teeth. The thing that will kill you is washing the blood off of its claws. The thing that will kill you is gathering skins. The thing that will kill you, you won't see it coming, The three of us sat there in silence for quite a while. I felt sick, shaken up. Luvia looked as if she wished she didn't have to tell me that. Is there anything I can do to stop it? I asked. Luvia slid our money back across the table to us. No charge for the reading. Tina and I slunk out of Luvia's house quietly. We didn't say a word on the way back to our houses. Tina just found out the name of the love of her life. I got to listen to a horrifying cryptic message about my death. I was 12 years old. I was fucking terrified. When Tina left me at my doorstep, she tried to make light of the readings. How does she know who I'm going to marry? She asked. And it's not like some monster's going to get you. Some skin-shedding, bloody, sharp. It's not like some monster's going to get you. It's not like some monster isn't going to get you. For years I looked for it. The thing that will kill me. I could almost feel it. Sensed it just behind each car, swaying behind the trees at night. Underneath the fresh snow, waiting outside my window. With every step I hesitated. Every time I tried to sleep, I could almost see it. What had she said about its teeth? I looked out for sloughed skin, for blood, for skins, for hides, but I never found it. When I was 18, I left for college in California to get far away from the snow and the cold and the thing that will kill me. I stopped sensing it everywhere. My heart stopped pounding whenever I walked alone at night. Maybe whatever it was, it stayed in Vermont. Maybe it wasn't a thing at all. People in California laughed when I told them the story and it stopped seeming real. Just the ramblings of a tiny, ancient French-Canadian woman. It wasn't real. When I was 27, a wedding invitation came in the mail. Tina was getting married. This was the first I had heard of it. I was still in California and barely kept in contact with anyone from back east. It seemed like a past life. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Michael Carton and Tina. Wait, no, she had the name in her mind. Michael Carton, and she sought him out. It had nothing to do with Luvia. Her predictions weren't real. They couldn't be. Clairvoyants don't exist. It's ridiculous to think that kind of thing happens in the real world. I went to the wedding. Tina, Michael, and I laughed about the whole thing. The psychic knew. She predicted it. Of course she didn't. Tina and Michael decided it was nothing more than a funny story to tell their future children. Just tell us if you run into some beast with razor-sharp teeth that's gathering skins. Okay? Then we'll think it's more than just a funny coincidence. I left the wedding as sure as I ever was that the thing that will kill me wasn't real. Didn't exist. I'd look behind the trees, behind the cars. Nothing was waiting for me. Nothing was ready to skin me. I didn't know why I had been scared so long. The best thing about Tina's wedding was that we got back in touch for the first time in a very long time. We were very different people than we had been as children, but we still shared more of a bond than we realized. She was happy, living in Vermont with Michael. She told me everything that was going on in our town. The population slowly increasing. The new schools they were building. The babies that were born. Luvia dying. As the years went on, her calls and emails got less and less frequent. She always seemed to be busy. Soon they tapered off completely. I missed her, of course, but I had my own life, and I could check in on my childhood home whenever I wanted. One winter, I came into town to visit my parents for the holidays and decided I'd swing by Tina's house. I'd normally never just drop by, but she was pretty bad about answering her phone, and I really wanted to see her. I pulled up to her and Michael's house. 2 cars were in the driveway, so I figured they were both home. I walked up and rang the doorbell. Michael opened it, dressed in several layers and a large coat, as if he had just come in from the snow. He invited me inside. He looked very surprised to see me and asked if I had talked to Tina recently. I haven't, actually. Not in several months. Sorry for the invasion, I don't usually just drop by like this, but I was wondering if I could see her. I figured you'd know, that you'd have heard. She left me a few months ago, just up and left. Hasn't spoken to me since. Oh God, I said. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. He took off his coat and hung it on a coat rack by the door. Can I take your coat? He asked. I told him it was all right, that I wouldn't be staying long. I was just so shocked she'd do something like that. He was a really good guy. I'm sorry. I was about to get ready for bed. I've got an early workday tomorrow. Do you mind? He kicked off his shoes, pulled his sweater off, and headed toward his bathroom. I settled in, looked around their home. Of course I don't mind. Do you know where she went? I don't, he yelled from the bathroom, mouth full of toothpaste. She didn't call until after she was gone. That's awful. I'm sorry. He started flossing, and when he saw me looking toward him, closed the door for privacy. When I heard the shower water start running, I pulled out my phone, figuring I'd take this time to look through Tina's last messages to me, to see if she gave any hint to where she went, any clue. My phone fell out of my hand as I grabbed it out of my bag, and I saw it drop beneath the couch. As I felt around under the couch for my phone, my hand hit something else, a massive clump of long hair. I pulled it out from beneath the couch. Seemed so strange, such a large mass of hair. Brown hair, Tina's shade. Hair with a piece of scalp still attached. The thing that will kill you is gathering skins. I turned toward the bathroom door. Michael was still showering. The thing that will kill you is washing the blood off of its claws. Flossing, brushing. The thing that will kill you is sharpening its teeth. Sloughing off his outer clothes, his shoes. The thing that will kill you is shedding its skin. Oh God, the thing that will kill me. I heard the water in the shower stop. Movements from inside the bathroom. I ran out the door, slammed the door, sprinted to my car, shaking, watching the door. My hands fumbled with keys, shaking. The door to the house opened. My car started. I drove. I didn't look back. I drove, all through the night, through most of the next day, only stopping when I absolutely had to. I had no idea if he was following me. I had no idea what I had just seen. My heart didn't start beating normally again until I was 2 states away. I went home. This was months ago. I called the police. They investigated. Nothing turned up. They're sure she just left him, moved away. Maybe she did. Maybe she's far away, safe. Maybe nothing's coming for me. Maybe Michael's just a poor guy whose wife left him. Maybe it's nothing behind the trees, in the snow drifts, underneath the cars, outside my door at night, and the windows. Maybe it's nothing. Probably it's nothing. Luvia's been wrong before, hasn't she? The thing that will kill you. You won't see it coming. The story credit. Ashley Rose Wellman. I had the house to myself. My parents were spending the weekend in Toronto, and I'd spent the day hanging out with my girlfriend. Up until I dropped her off at home later that evening, it was an ordinary day, as close to perfection as possible. I took my girlfriend home at around 8 p.m., then got back to the house to relax, prepared for a night spent chilling out in the basement, watching movies alongside Charlie, my brother's dog. He's an anxious little bastard, and he likes the company. Naturally, Charlie wanted to go outside the moment I came in. Usually, he's all over himself, jumping up and barking, and this wasn't an exception. I went to the back door and opened it up, letting him loose upon the frozen snow that covered our backyard, then hung around to let him back in when he inevitably got cold 5 minutes later. Maybe I was impatient, or perhaps he was taking longer than usual. I wasn't watching the time after all. After a while, however, I opened the door and called out to him. I figured he'd come running like he always does, but for some reason he didn't this time. I waited at the door for a little while, looking around to see if I could spot him. He was outside all right, by the shed we have near the back of the yard, standing in the corner and staring at the house. He didn't move when I called to him. He just stood there, motionless on that frozen snow, in the moonlight, staring at me. I left him for a little while longer, figuring that he didn't want to come in. I stole a piece of some cherry cobbler my mom had put together and screwed around on my phone. I went out to the living room to watch some TV, figuring Charlie would probably want to come in eventually. I just started a rerun of The Simpsons when I thought I heard a scratch at the door. On instinct, I got up to let the mouthy bastard back in the house. But when I looked, he still hadn't moved from his spot by the shed. I could see the light reflected in his eyes. I'm not going to lie, that was a little bit creepy. I opened the door and stepped outside, calling out to him, hoping that maybe he would come running. He just stayed there, stock still. That's about at the point where it dawned on me that he looked off. I didn't have a clear view of him, just of his head and his eyes, in front of what I assumed was his body, but looking a little closer, it appeared as if his body was prostrate, but his head was perfectly upright. Was it just some weird, contorted pose? In the past, I had seen dogs do that sometimes, but right on the ice? I took a step off the porch, and as I did, I noticed something. I could see ice between his head and his body. Not a piece of ice. I could see the ice behind him. Took my brain a minute to process it all before the truth dawned on me. Charlie's head and body were no longer attached. His body lay limp by the shed, and his head impaled by what looked like a branch. From the porch, I hadn't been able to distinguish it from his black coat, but from my new vantage point, I could see it clearly. I took a step back, swearing and turning towards the house, wanting to get back to that safety. That's when I saw it. We'd stripped down the gazebo on the porch in preparation for winter weather, leaving it a metal skeleton, covered in ice from the recent freezing rain. Now I could see that cheap metal buckling under the weight of the creature that stood tensed on top, cracking the thin layer of ice and staring at me with unblinking eyes that reflected what little light there was back at me. It wasn't an animal. I don't know what the hell it was, and I didn't get a good look at it before it lunged for me. I tried to run, skidding backward onto the ice, and that thing landed just a few feet away from me. I didn't waste my time watching it. I tried to bolt for the door, expecting myself to slip and fall with every step, as I didn't exactly have a solid footing. Maybe the thing didn't either. I heard a noise behind me, a scream, like a person's, but wrong. It sounded pained and garbled, and it made my head hurt. I slammed the door behind me as I got inside, locking it and staring out at the thing that had attacked me. It stood, almost 8 feet tall, with long, scrawny limbs and bulbous eyes that didn't look like they blinked. Its skin was gray and tight against its body. With every breath, I could catch glimpses of its ribcage. Its hands had long, bony fingers, each ending in a long, disgusting nail, and I could see the dried blood on them. It stared at me through the glass, and I swear it was smiling at me. For a moment, I'd expected it to try and break in. After all, that glass wasn't all that hard to break. I'd done it myself once, in fact, when I'd been locked out. The creature turned away, crouching down on all fours, and loped towards Charlie's body. I watched as it grabbed the corpse and looked back at me, before starting to drag it towards the door, trailing blood all the while. That thing wanted me to watch as it tore Charlie apart and feasted on him. It looked at me as it did its work, and I watched in quiet horror. It didn't seem to react when I took out my cell phone and called 911. I told the operator there was an aggressive animal outside my house. I lied and said that it was a bear, though by that point I was confident that it was nothing I had ever seen before. The thing watched me throughout the entirety of the call. I didn't get the impression that it understood what I was doing. That, at least, was to my advantage. It also didn't seem to think of just breaking the glass. I didn't want to watch what it was doing to Charlie, but I also didn't want to take my eyes off it, just in case. The emergency responders asked me to stay on the phone. That was just fine by me. I waited, sickened and engaging this thing in a surreal staring contest. My earlier suspicions were then confirmed. It never blinked, not once. I watched its teeth, its lengthy, uneven, carnivorous teeth, tear into the meat of my brother's dog, and listened to the sickening ripping noises. I don't know how long we stayed like that, staring at each other. I heard the sirens not too long after. I don't know how much time passed, as I didn't bother to look at the clock. I was too afraid to take my eyes off of that damn thing. A moment later, the sound of nearby sirens drew its attention, and I saw it leap suddenly up onto the roof. Its claws scraped against the shingles, and I followed it towards the front of the house, where I caught a glimpse of red and blue lights approaching. By then, there was no sign of the creature or any more sounds from the roof. I watched one of the police officers come up my walkway, his partner trailing behind, before breaking off to head towards the gate leading to the back. The lead officer headed to my door. He was about to knock when he noticed me waiting in the doorway. I opened it just a crack. "It's on the roof!" I cried out, helpless to conceal the terror in my voice. Before the officer could respond, the strangled cry of his partner rang out, alongside the hellish shriek of the creature. I cursed and pulled my door closed again, watching as the officer drew his weapon and went around back. I locked my door and tried to follow his location through the windows. I monitored him closely as he made his way around the side of my house, armed with a flashlight and a gun. I only caught a glimpse of that thing when his light hit it. It shrieked and leaped away as if burned, revealing the mangled carcass of the other officer. I could see the white of bone and a mess of red that had been rendered unrecognizable. A telltale thud alerted me to the creature's presence on my roof. The remaining officer spun around, boots crunching in the snow, and tried to follow the beast. He raised his gun but didn't fire. I heard scratching on the roof heading away from myself and the officer, which ceased a moment later. I looked back at the officer, who stumbled back towards his car, trying to retrace his steps. Perhaps he was calling for backup. Before breaking into a clumsy run, he glanced at me momentarily through the window. Scratching on my ceiling told me that the creature on my roof was stalking him. I followed him back towards the front of my house, rushing from window to window to get a better view. He kept his distance from the building as if he could escape the creature's wrath. Reaching his car, I saw him open the driver's side door and then freeze, raise his gun and fire 2 shots into the darkness. I didn't know if he hit his target or not. All I heard was the sound of claws scraping along my roof as the creature retreated. Then the officer barricaded himself inside his car, and the waiting game began anew. The monster had made its escape by the time backup and first responders arrived. Paramedics took Charlie's body away in a bag, and another officer collected my statement. Then, with the cops still around, I got in my car and hightailed it to a nearby hotel, where I crashed for the night. I don't know what the hell that thing was or what more it had planned. I don't think the cops know much either. And so far, since the incident, it's been quiet. Although, if I listen carefully, I swear I can hear the sound of nails clicking on the wood floor outside my room. Credit, Ryan Peacock. There's always something inherently eerie about living in the forest, in complete isolation. You almost always assume the worst when you're on your own, surrounded by the thickly wooded area. It's almost like time doesn't pass the same as it would anywhere else. Like the edge of the woods was a portal capable of transferring you to the unknown the moment you placed your feet on the soft dirt. As if the vegetation is closing in on you the further you get from civilization. It's not an ideal situation for most, so you can imagine my feelings when I had to move into one. Allow me to explain, because you'll need some backstory to understand the depth of what I'm going to say. You can call me Jed. I've grown up in a city, and that's where I had stayed for almost my whole existence. I lived on my own in an apartment, but that's where this whole thing started. It was getting more challenging every passing month to pay rent, and that was in an apartment in the rougher parts of the area. My credit wasn't where it probably should have been, so I really couldn't manage to get a home in the city at all. I finally had to settle on a small trailer in the woods. It was about 4 hours away from my old place, with my sister begrudgingly agreeing to help me move out. I didn't have many belongings, so it proved to be a generally easy task. The moment I bade farewell to my older sister and she drove away, I closed the door. That moment, I realized I was really on my own. I don't care to admit it, but being around people gave me an odd sense of comfort. That was something I didn't have anymore, but I vaguely remembered seeing a house not too far from here, so I figured maybe I should say hello, so I can have at least a tiny bit of company. I knocked on the door, and an old man came to open it. I introduced myself, and he almost immediately invited me in for coffee. He was probably glad to have some company, which I could understand due to the location. I came to know him as Otis. He owned land here and in the field out behind his house and used it for farming. The only people he spoke to were those who would come and buy his produce, and it was all business talk. I watched my drink cool while he told me about the area. He'd been living here a long time. We were making small talk when, seemingly out of nowhere, he looked me dead in the eye until I stopped talking. As soon as my mouth shut, he asked me if I was new to these parts. When I responded with a simple yes, he told me I needed to watch out for the vermins, which confused me. I expected small animals to be a given, but the way he said it made it sound off. I asked him what he meant. He sighed and settled in his chair. From what he told me, these weren't your typical vermins. He said it was imperative that I not let them fool me. I was puzzled, but I didn't want to be rude, and he was the only neighbor I had. So I brushed off the creatures he described as unusually ugly animals that he might have run into. Besides, he was old, and he seemed to enjoy my company, so he was probably looking out for me since I didn't have lots of experience with animals aside from pigeons and the occasional raccoon. A few weeks went by, each being more uneventful than the last, visits with Otis aside. I was becoming close friends with him, and I spent time with him often. Despite the weird vermin comments now and then, he was a nice guy. He told me stories of his late wife and of his children who have long since moved out to attend school. I help him out on his farm sometimes, which I can tell he appreciates due to his having some trouble because of his age. Sometimes we would sit inside and watch his black and white TV, and occasionally we'd eat dinner together. It comforted me knowing I wasn't entirely on my own like I initially thought. When I returned home, though, it felt painfully lonesome. I mindlessly flipped the TV on as I sat on the couch, a habit I had started not long after the move. It helped somewhat to ease the feelings of isolation, but I'd take what I could since I couldn't simply go to Otis's house all the time. The rain followed soon after. I was half asleep, barely paying attention to the program that was showing, listening to the peaceful patter of rain on the window pane. When I was about to get up and move to my room, I felt that something was wrong. The formerly consistent sounds of rain had become sporadic. When I crept to the kitchen to grab a snack on the way to the bedroom, it hit me. There wasn't any noise coming from the kitchen window. It wasn't raining anymore. I froze. The pitter-patter of what I imagined was rain could be faintly heard if I listened carefully. I had to see what it was. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't discover what was out there. With every step I took, my feet felt heavier. I cringed at the drawn-out creaking of the shoddy flooring. The television's blue light illuminated part of the room, and just enough so I could see a few feet out the window. I flinched when a light suddenly turned on, temporarily blinding me. The motion sensor. The sight of fingers pressed up against the glass caused me to jump back, frantically studying whoever or whatever they belonged to. The face I saw, I'm not even sure I can describe it today. I don't trust my memory. I thought it was a person, but it just couldn't have been. No, all I saw was its smile. A motionless, unnaturally wide smirk. My attention was drawn immediately to its teeth. Its tusk-like fangs, dripping with some unknown substance, stuck out like a sore thumb from its wretched maw. I think it was a she. I wasn't going to stick around and study her any longer, however, to confirm. I fumbled around and made my way to my room as fast as my legs could carry me. My heart practically leaped out of my chest as I locked the door. My windows, doors, and even the shed have remained locked tight since then. My shed lock was more of a rope, but no one was trying to steal gardening supplies. That wasn't a safety concern, so I didn't waste much time on it. When I awoke, the sun shone through the blinds, painting my skin with stripes of morning light. I sat up in bed, looking at the TV, which was now displaying nothing but static. I went to turn it off on the way to the kitchen for a coffee, or 6, considering the night I'd had. I racked my brain for any more details I could recollect. Her clothes had been soiled and torn, caked in dirt and God knows what else. Her disheveled hair flared up in all directions. It was easy to see her hair was red, as it stood out almost as much as those damn teeth. What was the worst, though, is that a word went through my mind the whole time I thought about her. Fake. She didn't look like an actual person. The way her body contorted, her facial expression, it wasn't possible. She was a poor facsimile of a human being. I had to warn Otis. I hopped in my car, but I took a moment to glance at the backyard. The shed doors were open. I didn't have time to investigate. Otis needed to know. I practically jumped out of my car when I pulled up to his driveway, knocking much more desperately than usually. He had to answer. His truck was in the garage. When no one came to the door, I opened it reluctantly. The sight before me made me regret everything I'd done up until that point. Otis. He was sprawled motionless on the carpet, a look of hopelessness in his eyes. It all happened so fast. There was a gash in his chest which extended down to his pelvis, and approximately half of his extremities were missing. My eyes brimmed with tears as I leaned over his remains. Whoever did this, whatever did this, had no plan. It was a mess. All of the wounds were completely inconsistent. All I could do was glance around, noticing the broken bottles and tipped over furniture littering the room, indicating a struggle. I couldn't imagine Otis fighting. Images of him sitting in a rocking chair, peacefully smoking a cigar, flashed in my head. I turned slowly to look in the direction of the doorway, and there she stood, clutching the frame with that permanent smirk plastered on her face. Crimson sloppily coated her mouth and face, trickling onto her clothing. She was holding my garden shears. She stared at me for what seemed like an eternity. Despite the smile, her eyes betrayed fear, as if she was trying to express emotion, but her mouth refused to uncurl. I scrambled for the back door, grabbing a notebook and a pen from a counter as I made my escape, thinking that perhaps they would come in handy later. As I crossed the threshold of the trailer and darted into the outdoors, one word echoed in my mind, over and over again, like a broken record. Fake, fake, fake. I had nowhere else to go but the cornfield. I ducked into the stalks, sprinting to safety. It was my only option. I tried to ignore the stinging of the plants around me and did my best to travel in one direction. That brings me to now. I'm lost in the woods, completely isolated, but I'm not sure which idea is scarier. Am I on my own, or is she following me? I'm not gonna last much longer out here. Now please listen. I want to tell you something a wise man once told me. The vermins don't look real. It is imperative that you not let them fool you. There are all sorts of possibilities for how I'll meet my end. I'll most likely either die from starvation or become sustenance for her. I feel sick every time I try to think of how long it will take for her to grow hungry again. One day, Otis won't be enough to satisfy her. Sometimes I think about how I just left him there for her to devour, spending a minimal amount of time mourning the loss of a dear friend. I'm making up for that time now. I'll be waiting, among the bushes and the trees, helpless. I've been staring up at the baby blue sky for hours, and in that time the clouds haven't moved. Something is wrong. When will the day she finds me finally arrive? I don't know. I've written this as a warning to all of you. If you ever come across my body, let it be known. The passing of time is strange out here. The story credit, Warpy Glassman. Subscribe for more horror stories every day.